everyone. My name is Penny Wright. I want to begin by thanking all of you for your patience. We had probably our most scary technological challenge, and fortunately, with the help of our tech person Evan and Steve's and Celia's grandson Yasha in the back, we got it figured out. So you're here and we'll get started. About a year ago, I was introduced to Steve and Celia when they came to a program here at the library. And we got to chatting, and it came out that he is a physicist and has an interesting past and knows a lot of things, so we invited him here. So tonight's the night. Steve Rosen is a physicist whose specialty is cosmic radiation. He was a scientist at the Institut d'Astrophysique in Paris and the Centre d'études nucléaires in Saclay. He also worked at Los Alamos and at a prominent think tank on science policy of national and issues of national defense. His physics articles have appeared in scientific journals, and his popular essays have appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the East Hampton Star. His book, Future Facts, is listed somewhere as one of the most important 100 books of the 20th century. Nobel laureate Roald Hoffman said that his book, Career Renewal, which is co-authored with his wife Celia, who is in the room as well, Celia, welcome, is the ultimate self-help manual for the intelligent job seeker. After a recent stroke, Steve wrote a memoir titled Youth, Middle Age, and You Look Great. Now to come back as a memoir. It's a pleasure to have him here. Please welcome Steve Rosen.
Thank you, Penny. Great introduction. My father would have loved it, and my mother would have believed it. What a great tribute to Albert Einstein to see so many people here today honoring his memory and his work. And I think maybe that's why he's smiling. He's happy. He also was a witty guy, and he loved jokes. He told jokes, and jokes were told of him. And one of my favorite is, he was asked, what was the greatest invention of all time? And his answer was, compound interest. He could also be smiling because 100 years after his 1916 paper that predicted gravitational waves, 100 years, they were detected. And this could make him smiling as well, somewhere. He was once on a train in England, and he asked the conductor, does Oxford stop at this train? Relativity, right? So, how would you define a rock star? I have a definition, and who in your opinion are rock stars? I have my own ideas about this, and the definition of rock star that I like is that a person who inspires intense or fanatic admiration. The Beatles, Bob Dylan, he got the Nobel Prize. I think the Beatles should have gotten the Nobel Prize also. And I tried to quantify celebrity, and I looked up Albert Einstein on the web. And, oops. Uh-oh. What happened? I lost the signal. Oh, here it is. Gotcha. So he was definitely a celebrity, and if he were alive today, I believe that you would agree with me, and by the end of my talk, about 30 or 40 minutes from now, I hope you'll agree that he would be called a rock star. There was no such term in those days. 63 years ago, I met a man named Banish Hoffman who wrote a paper with Albert Einstein. And if I hit this thing, will I lose this picture?
I don't think so. Try the next key on the laptop.
No, I just want, okay. So here's the number of hits. I should have asked you first. How many hits on Google do you think Albert Einstein, and most people will get, a few thousand, 134 million. And the Beatles, 149 million. So I think they're up there in rock star territory. Charlie Chaplin, Michael Jackson, much lower. Mozart, okay. I think he's up there in rock star territory. In 1931, he was super famous by then, and Charlie Chaplin had a new movie called City Lights, 1931. And Einstein was so famous, Charlie Chaplin and Einstein hung out together. I guess I should be talking to the microphone. Sorry about that. So 1931, Charlie Chaplin and Albert Einstein were being celebrated by hundreds of fans and journalists. And Charlie Chaplin said to Albert Einstein, "They're cheering me because they understand me. And they're cheering you because they do not understand you." So Albert Einstein said, "What does this all mean?" And Charlie Chaplin said, "Absolutely nothing." Now, Einstein did not like publicity, and that was one of the many charming things about him. And as a kid, I wanted to be Albert Einstein, but all I got to do to be is to be able to talk about him. So, Midas touch. So, Einstein said that he had something like a Midas touch because everything he said turned into print. And he really, really hated reporters, and I'll give you an example of that. By the way, Studs Terkel said, "You can never go wrong quoting Einstein." So what happened once when he was on a train in Europe after 1919, when he became a superstar, for reasons we're going to discuss, a reporter came up to him and said, "Dr. Einstein, I'd like to interview you." And he said, "I am not Dr. Einstein." What happened? This is my grandson. He's brilliant. So he said, "I'm not Dr. Einstein." And the reporter said, "Yes, you are. I've seen your picture in many papers." And Einstein said, "Who should know better, you or me?" So November 10th, 1919, was the day that the New York Times ran a super headline, which I'm going to show you in a moment, as soon as Yasha fixes this thing. And he became an instant celebrity. And there were a lot of reasons for it. And there are two different populations I want to talk about for whom he became a celebrity, a superstar. One was the general public, who loved him for a lot of reasons and thought him mysterious. He was not a bragger. He really didn't like being famous. But some of the language that he used, or was used to describe what he did, was mysterious and, I guess, enchanting in a certain way. Curved space. A childhood friend of mine said, "Curved space must be the product of a warped mind." His fame came at the right time. He used other phrases we use to talk about his work: four-dimensional, space-time continuum. We're back. Thank you, Yosha. Now, J. Robert Oppenheimer wrote an essay about Einstein after he died. Oppenheimer knew him very well because he was head of the Institute for Advanced Study, where Einstein spent most of his life after he left Germany. And Einstein, this was in the New York Review of Books, Oppenheimer described Einstein as friendly, lonely, strange, and with a luminous mind. So, I'm having trouble doing this. Okay, here are the headlines from the New York Times. These are major stories. And now I'm going to show you a scholar named Marshall Misner wrote a paper in 1985 trying to explain why Einstein was famous to the general public. And he came up with a bunch of reasons, and you can read them yourself. The right kind of announcement, the right phrases. I mentioned curved space, four-dimensional space-time continuum. The right chords were touched. There was a certain mystery about it. People felt it was so hard to understand. It must be interesting. The right kind, and so on and so forth. So he summarized. He says this is a tale. The publicity to the general public is a tale of serendipity, a public campaign run by an invisible hand. So now I want to talk to you about why he was famous and admired and revered by scientists. And in one year, 1905, he did four things, each one of which would have been deserving of the Nobel Prize. He did not get the Nobel Prize for special relativity, the third. Oh, can I try this? Wonderful. Okay. Photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, special relativity equals mc squared. I'll tell you a little bit about that, but I just want to warn you, there's another physicist in the room, so I have to watch my step. Photoelectric effect proved that light came in packets or quanta particles, and the effect was explained by Einstein because when light shone on a metal, electrons were ejected, but only if the light was above a certain energy. Brownian motion showed that there were molecules because he was able to explain the suspension of pollen particles that were being knocked around by molecules in the liquid, very much like dust motes in the air are knocked around by molecules of the air moving around. Special relativity, the short version of special relativity, and I'm not going to spend much time on it because it's much harder to understand than general relativity, which we're going to be talking about in a moment. Let me say that it was an operational definition of simultaneity. How's that for confusion? Let me elaborate. If there is a spaceship and we on Earth try to measure things in a moving spaceship, because the speed of light has been proven to be constant, independent of its source or its receiver, you would have to communicate with the spaceship by light beams. And because it's constant and it's not obvious, lengths in the moving spaceship as measured from Earth shrink, time slows down, and mass increases. Believe it or not. That's true. And I see my friend Jerry is falling asleep. Thank you. Don't do that, Jerry. Wait for the Q&A. So, and of course, E equals mc squared, probably the most famous equation in history. So that's why professional scientists admire him in part. And it's quite remarkable. But even more remarkable is general relativity. We're going to come to Now, you remember in high school, if you took geometry, that there were axioms and postulates. And if you used them in the right way, you could come up with theorems and prove a whole universe of plane geometry. So Einstein was able to put special and general relativity into 3 postulates. Now, you don't have to understand it to appreciate that this is very basic and simple, from which all of his physics can be derived. Invariance principle, there's no absolute frame of reference. The speed of light is constant. He takes that experiment as a postulate. And the principle of equivalence, which I am now going to talk about. Okay. We have an elevator cab here and an elevator cab here. And this elevator cab, let's say, is right above the earth, or it's resting on the earth. And the person inside feels a pull downward because of gravity. The earth is pulling on this person with what we call an acceleration equal to the acceleration of gravity. This person is in an elevator cab very, very far away from any matter, any gravity. And there's an invisible cable accelerating this person upward with the same acceleration that gravity is accelerating this person downward. Einstein said that his happiest thought was that these 2 situations were identical, which is to say that there is no experiment that either of these persons can do inside the elevator cab that will allow them to distinguish or differentiate between these 2 situations. It sounds very simple, but it turns out to be extremely profound, and I'll show you why. Suppose there was a little hole, let's say 2 feet off the floor of this elevator cab, and a beam of light was sent in. Now, light travels very fast, as you know, but nevertheless, in the time it would take light to move across the elevator cab, since this elevator cab is being accelerated upward, the light would fall, and I've exaggerated, below the 2-foot mark on the opposite wall. I have just proved to you, if this is equivalent to this, then gravity can curve light. Oh, how about that? Isn't that wonderful? So I'm going to now show you a device which I have made a replica of. This was called Einstein's birthday present. And this is a real gift that was given to him by a friend, I. Bernard Cohen, who is a historian of mathematics. So I have made this in my own basement workshop, and I'm going to, and it's a replica. There's a funnel, there's a long tube with a ribbon connecting it to a little weight, and I put one of my rubber duckies on the end of it so you can see. Okay, now I'm going to come closer so you can see. This is hanging over the lip of the funnel. Did you ever see that? The weight.
Really?
Hi, that's too loud, sorry. So the weight of this little rubber ducky is about equal to this force of the spring pulling it down when it's at rest. But I am going to create a situation in a moment of zero gravity by letting this fall, free fall. So I haven't got enough hands to do this. So if I let this slip, what should happen? There will be no more gravitational force on this because of what I just showed you about the equivalence between acceleration and gravity. And the spring will pull this thing into the funnel. Anybody want to make some bets? Anybody want to try it? We'll do it afterwards. I'm very proud of this thing. Especially the sign. Okay, voila. So this slide is a quote from thank you, from an article in Scientific American, and it says, "A big grin spread across his face, and his eyes twinkled with delight. He was very, very happy to see this. It's such a simple-looking device, and yet it proved the most penetrating of Einstein's many penetrating ideas." So now I'm going to talk about curved space. And it really is not the product of a warped mind, even though my friend said so. And to do this, I'm going to read something else up. And let me... So I made a little... Teddy told me not to move around.
Well, you are moving around.
I'm sorry. Okay, so this is a box with a membrane that I stretched over it, and I made a grid. And we can pass this around, or you can come up and look at it during the Q&A. And I made a little 3, 4, 5 triangle. 3, 4, 5. Remember Pythagorean theorem? 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. That's a right triangle. And if it's on a plane surface, that works. But if I stretch the surface a little bit, you can see that the Pythagorean relationship might not work as well at all. And to drive that point home, I've taken that Pythagorean, that right 3, 4, 5 right triangle, and stretched it over the surface of a volleyball. And what do you think happens? The Pythagorean theorem doesn't work anymore. So how do you measure the curvature of space? One way is if you can figure out how far the triangle departs from Pythagoreanicity or Pythagoreanness, and that would give you a measure of the curvature of space, because you see that's perpendicular to the plane of the triangle. Now, do not waste your time trying to visualize this in 4 dimensions, because it's fruitless. However, mathematicians have found a way to do this. And if anybody tells you they can really visualize stuff like this, either they're Einstein or lying. So now I'm going to talk about, we're going to come back to curved space. But I want to talk about cosmology for a minute, because it bears on what we're going to say about general relativity. So many, back in the Roman times, they thought that, in the Greeks, they thought that there were spheres and that the stars were mounted on spheres or shells. And there was a man in the 18th century who asked a really profound question about the universe. He said, why is the night sky not bright? If the universe is infinite, and there are an infinite number of stars, then every line of sight line from your eye to a star, if there are an infinite number of stars, infinite space, should produce a bright night sky. And it would be the same as if you were standing in a forest, a dense forest, and everywhere you look, there's a tree behind a tree behind a tree. What's wrong with this picture? The universe is not infinite, and there are not an infinite number of stars. But we now know, although Einstein didn't know it at the time, he thought that the universe was in a steady state, and the people who came up with the steady state theory referred to the opposing theory, which is called the Big Bang theory, as in a pejorative way. Big Bang was not a nice phrase, although it's now accepted. And so I have an artist rendering, imagination, visualization of the Big Bang, where it starts off you creating matter out of nothing, the matter condensing into stars, the stars condensing into galaxies, and the galaxy, and here we are 14 billion years later. And why do I mention this? Because it bears on it bears on Einstein's theory of relativity. Now, stars evolve in two ways, depending on their mass. These are low mass stars, and they end up as supernova, and high mass stars end up as black holes. All of you know what black holes are from science fiction. By the way, how many people have seen the Einstein National Geographic series? Okay. That's another reason why Einstein is a superstar. Sorry. Apologies. Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay, I'm going to use the handheld mic from now on. Thanks. So now I want to tell you that my wife said no equations, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry because you can only get an idea of the kind of mind that Einstein had by looking at these equations. Can I use the pointer? You think the pointer's good? Yes?
Not a problem.
Okay. So the first equation, this one, is the universal law of gravitation. It's from Isaac Newton, another superstar, yes, a rock star. Said that the force between any two objects in the universe, it depends on the mass of each one and the distance between them. Universal law of gravitation. That's a law. This is the Constitution. This is Einstein. Now, what this says in words is that the mass tells space-time how to curve, and space-time tells mass how to move. If this tells you that what gravity does, this tells you what gravity is. Big, big difference. And in fact, I like to think of this as the difference between tell and show. Anton Chekhov once wrote a letter to his brother giving advice on how to write. And he said, "Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glints of silver on the shards of broken glass." And that's what all you have to know about this. Save your questions. Now I know people are allergic to math, and so even though this is like three-dimensional chess, to appreciate a lot of this, you really don't have to understand mathematics. You know, you don't have to read music to enjoy music, and it's the same thing. So, 63 years ago, I met a man named Banish Hoffman, who has his name on a paper with Albert Einstein. And that's a big deal. And it was an important paper. And Behnisch tells the following story about Albert Einstein. So he would be sitting next to Einstein in Einstein's office, side by side at his desk. And they would be working on these equations. By the way, just to know how complicated this is, these are 10 equations. They're nonlinear, interlinked differential equations. And believe it or not, even Einstein would get stuck when they were working on this. And Behnisch said, whenever Einstein got stuck, he would get up from the desk, he would pace the floor, and he had very long hair, and he would twist his hair. And after a few minutes of doing this, Behnisch said, Einstein would say, aha, I know what we have to do, and they would make an approximation, and it worked. And so Behnisch said, after Einstein died, whenever Behnisch was working on these equations and he got stuck, he would get up and he would pace the floor and he would twist his hair, but he didn't have long hair, and he said it never worked. So we're going to talk about black holes. First, gravitational lensing. So if gravity can bend light, then it can be used as an instrument to detect distant galaxies. And that's what this is, an artist's rendering of. So that's a new way of looking further into space than hitherto. Now, I'm going to show you a movie, a computer animation of two black holes. And I'm going to start this movie, and you're going to see them orbiting each other. There they go. So this is a computer simulation. These are solutions to Einstein's that field equations for the case of two binary black holes at some distance from the Earth. And they're going to merge in a moment. One of them is 20 solar masses, the other is 30 solar masses. And when they merge, they send out a gravitational wave about 5 solar masses. That's a lot of energy. These are the folks who did this, by the way. So this happened. We detected this. 1,000 physicists at a cost of about $1 billion detected the first gravitational waves about a year ago, and there have now been 3 instances of this. One of them is at 1 billion light years away. Now there are 10 to the 22 stars in the visible universe. So somewhere, somehow, there's a black hole and a partner that's orbiting each other and spiraling in to send out a gravitational wave. And how do we detect these? Well, there's an instrument called LIGO. And I'm going to show you how this works. We have 2 stations, one in Washington State and one in Louisiana. These arms are very long, a couple of miles, and light will come from here to a mirror that splits the light into one beam that way, one beam that way. They come back, recombine, and they come on the screen. And you're going to see an animation of this. If the distance of one arm is different or changes as a result of a gravitational wave from 2 binary stars interacting and merging, then the gravitational wave that arrives at these 2 stations will arrive at a certain number of seconds different apart depending on the distance and the speed of the gravitational wave. and it will change the length by distorting the space. So watch what happens. So there you see these waves, the light waves splitting, and there's a make-believe changing of the length. And now, if you see the light as a sinusoidal wave, it's going to reflect off this mirror, it's going to come back, it's going to combine with the one over here, and if these two are in phase, or in opposite phase, there's extinction, there's no light over here. And so this is very, very sensitive, and this took a long time. One of the guys who did it, Sergio studied with, and he was one of the guys who wrote this book on gravitation, which I think in 1970, just for comparison, these are Einstein's original papers. I bought this at a yard sale in East Hampton. I'm not kidding. It's about $4. Really heavy. So, LIGO means Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. And they're actually going to build one in India and one in outer space eventually. So this is a new kind of astronomy, gravitational wave astronomy, a new window on the universe. Quite remarkable. Now, Einstein was famous for having a roving eye. He really liked women. And I found in one of the books I have, an encyclopedia, it lists 12 women, at least 12 women by name, who he believed that he had relationships with. So there's this New Yorker cartoon that probably doesn't need much explanation. So this combined, one could say that Einstein was exploring the mysteries of curved space. And the woman is obviously very unhappy, and you can tell what we think they just finished doing. And the caption is, Einstein says, "To you, it was fast." So I want to talk about Einstein's legacy, and again, this applies both to the public, and to the scientific community. I mean, he was really a star to both populations. So gravity becomes geometry, as I explained to you about curved space. The photoelectric effect, if you have a digital camera, that depends on Einstein's stuff he did in 1905. If you have a smartphone and it has a GPS, believe it or not, that's due to Einstein, because your GPS communicates with satellites. Satellites are above the Earth, moving very fast. There are two corrections that have to be done. One, special relativity, because the thing is moving fast, the satellite. And two, because of the gravitational field, general relativity. That depends on Einstein. Your GPS would not work if Einstein hadn't lived. I mentioned molecules and gravitational wave astronomy, but I think there's another sort of cultural thing, which is that we no longer are the center of the universe. There is no center. And also paved the way for thinking about dark energy and dark matter, which is another story. So when gravitational waves were discovered, I was with the 7-year-old twins in our family, and I got so excited. I bought a book for children on Einstein, and I tried to explain relativity to them. And They were interested in the fact that he was kicked out of school because he was a wise ass and insulted the teachers. And they were interested in a few other things like some of his body parts. But I decided that I would sing a song. Well, before I tell you about the song, which I wrote for the grandchildren to help them understand special and general relativity, I have to tell you an Einstein joke. Dr. Einstein says to Rabbi Hillel, "Rabbi, is it true that all of Jewish morals and ethics can be summarized by saying the golden rule?" And Rabbi Hillel says, "Well, let me ask you a question, Dr. Einstein. Is it true that all of cosmology and black holes and stellar structure, galaxy formation can be summarized by saying, twinkle, twinkle, little star?" So this is an academic joke. So, based on that joke, I wrote a song for the grandchildren, and I am going to sing it for you and ask you to join me. And I'm going to have a little bouncing ball to help you. Albert Einstein, what a guy, had more thoughts than you or I. Special relativity, yeah, MC squared is E. That's special relativity. This is general relativity. Gravitation holds us down. If there's light around the town, it makes GPS's right. Squeezes space-time oh so tight. I'm going to stop here. I also want to thank my beautiful and brilliant wife, Celia Paul, for her encouragement. And my brilliant grandson, Rosen, for helping me with the song. Eager to hear your reactions, your impressions, your questions, and your comments. Yes. Would you?
Do you have any idea the background in how Einstein was able to come to America, and how is it that Hitler let him leave the country?
That's a great question. And Hitler loathed Einstein, and he had a price on Einstein's head. He wanted him dead. Why? Because he was a Jew, because he was a genius, because he won the Nobel Prize, he was famous, superstar, rock star. And Einstein was able to leave Germany with the help of some wealthy Americans who set up the Institute for Advanced. Now, every time I give this talk, somebody comes up.
Found a job at Princeton.
Yeah, that's right, the Institute for Advanced Study. And it was the Bamberger family.
Yes.
And some others as well.
And the person that set it all together was the accountant. He was an accountant. He set it all up.
You're talking about Otto Nathan?
No.
No. But every time I give this talk, somebody comes up to me and says, "I knew Albert Einstein, or my uncle was the executor of his will." And we have somebody here who I'm going to call on in a minute who actually knew Einstein, but I want to take some more questions first. So, please. Because this is Sergio. He told me that he studied with Kip Thorne, one of the authors. So he's going to ask me a really, really hard question, and I may not be able to answer.
No, I was just going to say that amongst the many accomplishments, like we saw GPS wouldn't work without the theory of relativity, there is another, Wall Street wouldn't work without Brownian
Please
motion.
explain.
Option theory. You know, everybody, people who trade options, let's say you can buy a call option on an IBM stock. The pricing of that was found in 1973 by Myro Schultz and Fisher Black. One was a mathematician, the Black-Scholes equation, and that assumes that stock prices follow a Brownian motion. And Einstein did that theory in the beginning of the century. So all the business of derivatives, option theory, it's another.
That's great. So
Consequence.
did you make a lot of money on this?
Yes, I became a trader.
Oh, you did? So I don't have to worry, you're not a physicist anymore. So how about some more questions, please? Hold on.
You don't stay there, it's okay. So Oppenheimer felt responsible for deaths around the world.
Yes, I think questions
Give it a mic.
Oppenheimer felt responsible for the death of many people. He claimed he was the destroyer of worlds. But in fact, Einstein was the originator of the concept of the bomb. Did he ever feel that he was responsible?
I think he did, but he did not work on the bomb. It was only his theories that were later developed into what became the bomb. And let me tell you a story about Oppenheimer. It's in McConnell's biography of Truman. After the war, Oppenheimer came to Truman, I think 1947. Maybe you've heard this story. And he said, I have blood on my hands, I have blood on my hands. I killed hundreds of thousands of people. And Truman said to him, I have blood on my hands, and I sleep very well at night. And when Oppenheimer left, Truman said to his secretary, if that damn fool ever comes around here, tell him I'm not available to see him. In other words, he was responsible for the decision to drop the bomb, not Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer made it possible. And I don't know, there are two kinds of geniuses. There's the kind that's just like us here in this room, only a lot smarter. And maybe that was Oppenheimer. And then there's the other kind. The kind that's so amazing that they're as if they're from a different planet. And that's Mozart, and that's Einstein. Mozart could compose a symphony while playing a game of billiards. No kidding. And Einstein was a super genius. One of these guys comes along a century. Questions? More?
Can I just add with respect to the atomic bomb? I think it was Leo Szilard, who was a Hungarian Jew who came from Germany and went to see Einstein and said, Einstein, you have to write a letter to the president urging for us to start developing the atomic bomb. If we don't do that, the Germans will do it. And Einstein was very reluctant.
Victor and Teller.
Yeah.
Helped him write the letter.
Yeah, and then he wrote the letter, but he was not involved.
That's right. So, yes, that's right. Everybody has heard, probably, if you saw the television series, 1 minute. So I want to address that. Einstein used to sail a little boat from the North Fork of Long Island in the late 30s. And it was, the name of the town was Cutchogue. Penny publicized this talk, and the library in Cutchogue wants me to give the same talk in Cutchogue in a few weeks. And so you can tell your friends who live up there if they want to hear the same thing again. But mentioning Cutchogue, I have to tell you that there is a person in the room who grew up knowing Einstein because she lived in Southold. And I'm going to ask her to describe very briefly how her father became good friends with Albert Einstein. And this is Joan Rothman Brill.
Well, I grew up in Southold, and my father had a store.
Yeah, stand up.
My father had a store in Southold, which is still there. And one day Einstein came in to buy something, and it turned out that they both played the violin. So Einstein said, well, we will play duets. You come to my house on Monday at 7 o'clock. Just like that, he said it. And my father couldn't believe it. So he went to Einstein's house, but he was not a very good violinist. So it kept breaking down, and finally they said, well, let's just talk. So they sat and talked and chatted, and it turned out that they had read the same books and had the same ideas. But my father, one field that he couldn't do was mathematics. And he said to Einstein, I cannot figure out why a rod contracts in the direction of the motion as it approaches the speed of light. And Einstein said, well, I will explain that to you. And my father said, but I don't know mathematics. He said, well, I will explain it without the use of mathematics. So one day they got together, and Einstein said, now I will explain it. So he explained it. And in my book, I have a book. And
Selling those books, right?
and it has the paper on which Einstein explained that without the use of mathematics. And it's full of mathematics. So,
You met Einstein. You would see him yourself? And what was
yes.
he like? What was he like as a person?
well, he used to come to our house and have dinner, and he liked children, and I was only 9 years old, and we were sitting in the kitchen playing games, and he came in and said, if you could jump up 1 foot on the earth, how high could you jump on the moon? And of course we didn't know. And he told us the answer to that, which is in my book.
Hi. For those of you who have not read Joan's book, it's fabulous. Hi, Joan. I wish you could tell them the story about when he came in for the sandals.
We've got about 5 or 10 minutes, okay? Keep it short.
Well, he came into the store, and he said, have you any sundials? So my father was kind of confused. He said, well, I have none here, but if I have one in my yard, and if you follow me, I'll show it to you. So they go through the office and out through the house and outside into the yard, and there is, on a pedestal, is a sundial. And Einstein starts to laugh and laugh. No, sundials for the feet.
Sandals. Thank you, Joe.
Now, my question to you, when you said that your father was playing violin with Einstein, you said he didn't play well. Who didn't play well, Einstein or?
They were both amateurs.
Okay.
More questions, please? Questions? Where are you?
The way I knew a fellow that was an accountant and worked for this accounting firm whose senior partner set up this whole thing. And he said that when they got Einstein to come to America, they guaranteed him a job at Princeton. There was a Princeton Advanced Lab, something like that. And they said he would get $10,000 a year. And he was amazed. He said, that kind of money? That's the end of the story that my friend told us.
It's a good story. How about some other people? Questions? I have a list of books that I recommend. And the first one is fantastic. I wrote a review of this for the East Hampton Star when it first came out. And we invited the author to Author's Night last year. And she was fantastic. This is a book that reads like a novel. And there's very little physics in it, but it's all about the story of how the team was formed that detected the gravitational waves, and the personalities of each of the guys, Kip Thorne being one of them, how they were able to get the government to pay $1 billion and organize 1,000 scientists around the world. This is an interesting book. If you're interested in this, he argues that Talmudic thinking and relativity are similar, but that's another talk. This one is a centennial volume. I have a copy, and this was my teacher, Banish Hoffman. He wrote a biography called Albert Einstein, Rebel. This is the best scientific and personal biography of Einstein by a theoretical physicist who knew him very well, Abraham Pais. And there is another interesting book, another centennial volume, the title of which is taken from a quote from Francis Bacon. The quote is, "There is no excellent beauty that hath not some strangeness in the proportion," which is a convoluted way of saying nothing's perfect, but the title of the book is Some Strangeness in the Proportion, and referring to Albert Einstein. If you have children or you want to talk to kids, these are two good books about it, and they're very simple, mostly talking about him as a person. How did he die? He died of an aneurysm, I believe, 1955. And there's a famous cartoonist of the time in the 50s called Herblock, and I had the slide, but my wife said, forget it. It shows, he was about in the 70s. In the 70s. And the cartoon shows the planet Earth with other planets around it, and there's a little sign on it that said, Einstein lived here. I should have showed you the slide. Yeah, some more questions, please.
I think you should get people John's book and tell them.
Okay.
I don't send them anything yet.
Yeah, Joan actually.
I have some here.
Joan, this is her book, and she wrote it about her father and Einstein. And she's got copies. She just happens to have 100 copies with her. $15. I read it. It's a nice book. And one more question, and then we stop, okay?
What were Einstein's religious beliefs?
Oh, interesting. The question is, what were his religious beliefs? Einstein went through a period when he was 12 or 13, brief period when he was religious. But the rest of his life he was not observant. But he did say that if my theory of general relativity is not correct, I feel sorry for the dear Lord. Only a genius would say something. And of course he was right. And what he meant by the theory was so beautiful that it had to be correct. Is
Thank you, Steve Rosen, for shining a light on this amazing human being. And thank you all for coming. And we'd love to see you again sometime. Have a glass of water on us. And thanks again for your patience.